Hello, this is Dr. Marty Klein with a Back to School video quickie. Well, for parents and kids of all ages, it's back to school time. And while mastering reading and writing are unquestionably important for young people, sexuality is pretty important too. That's because of an intense brew of emotions, norms, laws, and cultural change that grammar school, high school, and college students face today. So let's talk about some common concerns that parents have. Please note that these apply to children of all ages. Now, the first thing is that information and words won't hurt young people. Many adults are concerned that giving kids too much information will encourage them to try stuff that they wouldn't have thought of themselves. Science tells us otherwise. Teaching kids how pregnancy actually happens won't magically make them test out their fertility. Similarly, there are no magic syllables that will damage kids. Vagina, menstruation, and erection are no more harmful than woo-woo, the curse, or snake. The fact that so many adults have trouble with actual accurate words doesn't mean that kids are destined to. In fact, just the opposite. If you get humans comfortable with actual words for their body parts and processes when they're kids, they'll be comfortable with them 20, 30, or 40 years later, which is exactly the point. Gender. Oh, kids are hearing about gender dysphoria, gender as a continuum, transgenderism, and so on. So regardless of what you think about all that, you need to pay attention to it and talk to your kids about it. Now, reminder, the overwhelming majority of kids consider themselves the gender they were born with and have lived with all their lives. If so, they don't need to explore their gender identity. That said, here's what you can tell kids of all ages. Everyone deserves respect, no matter what. Bullying is never okay, either to participate in or to watch. Now, if a kid thinks that they're just a regular boy or regular girl, of course that's okay. No, you're not going to turn into a different gender if you don't want to. And if you're confused, come and talk with me. By the way, I, the parent, know exactly what gender I am. Most kids can benefit from increased empathy and curiosity about people different from them. They can also decide that they're a basic male or female gender rather than a more complex one. And this doesn't make them mean or old-fashioned or clueless. If a kid is what the gender fluid movement calls cisgender, they shouldn't feel pressured to think any further about their gender identity. And they can call themselves just male or female rather than cis male or cis female without apology. Masturbation. Well, masturbation is okay. The way that some adults hide it or demonize it, you'd think it was some newfangled thing with unknown side effects. Of course, the opposite is true. People have been pleasuring themselves since the beginning of time. The evolutionary psychologists would say that's why our arms are so long. And no one has ever suffered or died from the physical effects of masturbation. Emotional effects, of course, are another thing. Uncounted people, children and adults, suffer guilt, anxiety, and shame about this basic human activity. When I lecture to parents about childhood sexuality, I always get questions about how to handle masturbation, or even worse, how to prevent it. I tell such parents to handle their kids' self-pleasuring the way that they handle every other part of their youthful sexuality. Talk about it, validate kids' experience, provide some boundaries, not in church or at the dinner table, please, and encourage, not discourage, more questions. Discouraging or preventing masturbation? Yeah, it can certainly be done, as long as you're willing to torment your kids with guilt and shame, possibly for the rest of their lives. Now, sex play among kids. With today's attention to sexual coercion and exploitation, it's equally important to acknowledge that healthy children play with each other sexually. They're curious about their own and others' bodies. They want to feel connected with their friends and their cousins. They enjoy the pleasure. And once they discover it's taboo, of course they want to do it more. Sounds just like adults, doesn't it? Well, a simple guideline is that if the kids are close in age and no one's feeling pressured and no one's being hurt physically, it's almost certainly harmless. In children who are old enough to get or cause a pregnancy, of course, that has to be covered. If a parent stumbles onto kids playing doctor or some other sex game, staying calm is certainly the most important response. If an adult observes or suspects actual coercion, of course, interrupting and investigating it are appropriate. Critical note, caring parents should be very, very, very slow to report any activity between same-age children to Child Protective Services or other governmental agencies. When it comes to kids, things with government agencies can careen out of control very quickly with disastrous results. Sexting. Sexting is actually dangerous, although not in the way that you might think. Kids of every age love exploring and demonstrating their autonomy, and kids have a lot of trouble imagining that although they own their own bodies, they do not own the right to photograph or video their bodies nude or sexual. Kids are understandably confused about adults' hysteria about them sharing nude photos of themselves with their friends. And yet, the evidence is absolutely clear. Government at every level will destroy the lives of young people who they catch sexting. Courts across the country have affirmed that a minor who texts someone a naked picture of themselves is creating and distributing child pornography, and the recipient has possession of child pornography. These are federal offenses with enormous penalties, regardless of how truly innocent the activity was. Kids of every age need to understand the concept that sexuality is a good thing, although the grown-ups in charge have decided it's very dangerous to take or share sexy pictures of yourself until you're an adult. That's the rule, and you must follow it. If you get caught doing it, there's very little that I, your parent, can do to help you. So, homework for parents. Find out what your kid's school is teaching about sexuality. More than half of all states mandate sexuality education, and some of it is dangerous garbage, emphasizing premarital abstinence, lying about the likely consequences of casual sex, and refusing to use medically accurate language. It can be even worse in states that don't mandate anything. Find out if what your kid's being taught is acceptable to you. And if you don't want to become active in changing the school's curriculum, make sure you correct it at home. And talk about sex with your kids now so you can talk about porn soon. When should you talk to your kids about sex? Now. If you haven't spoken to your kids in the last 6 months, you're behind schedule. After all, your kids have changed in many other ways this past year, right? You don't want a conversation with your kids about porn to be your first talk about sex, right? So get on the sex conversation now. You can start anywhere, including, I'm kind of embarrassed to talk about this, but let's go. And make sure that your conversations about sex are not focused primarily on danger. After all, when you discuss nutrition with your kids, you don't focus mostly on getting sick, right? Well, I'm Dr. Marty Klein. Thanks for sharing a little back to school advice with me. By the way, I drop one of these quickies every 2, 3, 4 weeks. So if you want to get pinged when I do, just click the subscribe button at the bottom of your screen, click like, and you'll get an email whenever I publish a new video. Thanks.